First of all, I would like to thank Alzheimer Europe for organizing this symposium and allowing us to share what we think is a game-changing project in the field of Alzheimer's research and clinical drug development. Now, just a small word about, and I think it says EPAT, an industry perspective. I would like to stress an industry perspective. So I'm not standing here speaking for the whole of the pharmaceutical industry. I know many of the colleagues who would agree with what I'm saying, but what you're going to hear are my views. So just be kind of slight caveat there. To start with is kind of why is the pharmaceutical industry, why are we so engaged in projects such as this one? This gives you an overview, and I think you saw a different slide this morning with all the bubbles showing which targets and products were in development. And there are plenty out there, and we're making progress. But if you look at and I actually put the title on there, The Sad Truth, because it's pretty sad when you look at the picture. If you look at the last 15 years, there were only 3 drugs approved. Actually, none of those drugs were approved in the last 10 years. And it's not, the question you can then ask is why? It's certainly not because we didn't try. Because if you look between 1998 and 2011, there were 101 products in development. Pharmaceutical industries spend a lot of money and effort in trying to develop these drugs. Still, only 3 out of those 101 actually made it to the market, making a difference for people living with dementia now. So why is it? And you heard these arguments already a couple of times this morning from a couple of speakers, but I think they're so important I'm going to repeat them. So how come we didn't achieve what we set out to do 15, 20 years ago? Well, one of the consequences, something you heard before, is maybe we're treating too late in the disease. We're intervening too late. We should start 10, 15 years before the actual clinical symptoms occur. Are we treating the right people? And there are kind of 2 aspects here. First, as Simon, I think, was said earlier today, we actually figured out after the facts that in our clinical trials that involve thousands and thousands of people with dementia, 20% of them actually didn't have beta amyloid deposition in their brain. So they were actually the wrong people we were including in our clinical trials. Linked to that is, if you think about it, we've done all these studies, we've gathered all those data, but we've gathered those data on a clinical trial population that might not have been the right one. We might not have started the treatment at the right time. So it begs the question of those 98 who didn't make it. Maybe they could work if we target the right population, if we target it at the right time. We just don't know. So what are we going to do with those data? There is a huge resource out there that we can tap. And unfortunately, we're starting to do it, but we are not doing it as fully as we could. And then the third one is the intervention. I think over the last 20 years, all of the clinical trial development has focused on the amyloid pathway. But there is so much more, and we are still learning new targets every day. So that's also something we need to do. Taking all these questions together, there was a real call to action in 2013 by the New York Academy of Sciences. They got together a bunch of experienced people, Simon actually was one of them, and instructed them to think about what can we do differently? What do we need to do to really come up with a preventive therapy for Alzheimer's dementia, and how should we do it? As a result of this, a number of initiatives started, not only in Europe, but across the globe. And this is not an exhaustive slide, and I should probably, given what's happened in the last 2-3 years, this requires quite some updates. But I would like to point out the IMI, the Innovative Medicines Initiative, because they really rallied behind this call and started, as you heard, projects like Eteonomy, EMIF, and the one we're working on, EPAT. So what are we trying to do, all these projects together? Because EPAT, and I think that's also an important message, EPAT is trying to move the needle on how we actually develop drugs and do clinical trials, but EPAT is only one piece of the entire puzzle. And the bigger question we're all trying to answer, all of us together, not just EPAT, is get a better understanding of Alzheimer's disease. How does it progress? What makes people be at higher risk of developing dementia due to Alzheimer's and not others? Identify new targets, because we really need them. Currently we have, you've heard already, well, amyloid is still out there. It's the tau pathology. And we're slightly scratching the surface of the neuroinflammatory pathways. But there are probably plenty others. And then in the end, the third one, the third bubble, is how can we actually make sure that we learn from each other in a much faster way? Just think about what we've been doing for the last 20 years. Each pharmaceutical company was doing their own clinical development program. And many of us were actually doing trials with similar molecules, targeting similar parts of the pathways. But we were doing it in parallel. And sadly enough, many of us were actually making the same mistakes. So how can we avoid it? How can we do 1 or 2 trials and share what we learned, so we don't have to redo it all on our own? So what do we actually need? And I think these are the big questions the pharmaceutical industry is really after. To make our drug development more efficient is, we are looking for a higher degree of certainty. Are we actually treating the right people? People meaning either people who are already have developed dementia, but also the other populations, the people we term, as Simon said, the preclinical populations, the people who are in the intermediate stage, mild cognitive impairment or prodromal. Linked to that is also, are we looking at the right signal? And I think this is an important question in a sense, because what we've been doing in the past is and that's also how our regulatory agencies like the European Medicines Agency or the Food and Drug Administration in the United States is looking at it. Normal trials look at a cognitive endpoint and also at some measure of functional improvement in subjects or in patients who have developed Alzheimer's dementia. But how can you translate a cognitive endpoint if you're looking at a preclinical population? What does it mean for someone who has evidence of the disease but doesn't have symptoms yet? So how long would you need to test? Or can we be smarter about it and try to find a biomarker that's actually predictive and shorten our studies, but a biomarker that's predictive enough so that we don't have to find out 10 years down the line that although we saw a change in a biomarker, there was actually no relation with an improvement in cognition. So important questions. It brings us to the right-hand side, this kind of validated biomarkers, I already talked about that, but also real impact measures. What does it mean for people who have Alzheimer's disease? What measures can we implement so that it actually changes your life, their life, potentially also my life a couple of years in the future? So how do we do that? And then at the bottom is how can we actually do trials in a much more efficient way? Just to give you, I just highlighted a couple. And faster recruitment for us is a really important one, because it's in pharmaceutical industry, the longer a trial takes, the more expensive it becomes. To give you an idea, currently when we do clinical trials, we work together with hospitals and universities. On average, we recruit 0.1 patient per hospital per month. Now think about it. If you have to do a trial in 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 people, how long does it take? And then multiply that by the numerous companies who actually do it. So it's a really big thing for pharmaceutical industry. And we believe EPAT can make a huge difference because of the things Simon pointed out. We also need an infrastructure that we can rely on, meaning what pharmaceutical industry has been doing in the past is like, I'm from Janssen, so we would set up a clinical trial and we would ask the investigators, we would like you to do certain assessments, be it a lumbar puncture or a PET scan, according to what we need. And then another company would come along and say, well, we would like it slightly different, and so on and so on and so on. The same for cognitive assessments. So what you end up with is very well conducted trials, but if you want to look at all the data together, you actually have a problem, because you took those measurements in a slightly different way. So we want to come up with a way we can do it all in the same way and actually share those data. Which actually brings me to the last point, which is a really important one. I think the most important one on all the slides I've shown is share the data and learn earlier. Now, it took us a while to get there, but I'm confident in saying this, and I think I can speak for the whole industry here, is we really are strong believers in sharing those data and learning faster. It's kind of, I talked about that already. Now, summarizing, this is my last slide, is kind of what is in it for us if we do this right? What do we gain by it? The first one, and I'm not going to dwell on the technicalities too much, but it's the advantages an adaptive trial brings us. And there are many of those. As Simon already said in his talk, is the advantage of one of the main advantages is we can learn faster with less data. We can make decisions earlier. And I think one of the important quotes Simon made earlier today is, what we are looking for is to fail faster. Now, it might sound a little bit contradictory, but the faster we fail, the faster we can stop a particular development and use those resources and research other potential valuable drugs. Because if we stick to a trial for 5-6 years, that's the one or two compounds we're going to focus on, and all the other ones are going to stay on the bench. Because and although Simon said in the beginning, we're really happy that the European Commission is there and pharma because we get more money, but I can assure you the resources of pharma are also limited. Then the second point is actually this additional advantages, and I already touched upon a number of these, and I'm not going to read through them, but I think in summary, I can say it's exposing less people to investigational medicines because we don't know if they work or not, which is a good thing. Also exposing less people to placebo because although we need placebo and we need it to learn from, anyone who enters a clinical trial for an Alzheimer drug in development hopes to get an effective medication. So it's kind of a bummer when you end up on placebo. It's kind of what we do here is, if we see a trial doesn't fit, a drug doesn't work, we stop the trial and we re-randomize those people in another arm of the study. And I think the way we do it is, if you've been on placebo once, the chances that you're actually going to be on a drug later is increased. We kind of tweak the randomization a little bit. So it's and being from Janssen, we strongly believe in what we call our credo, and I'm not going to recite the whole credo, it's going to take too long, but our credo actually starts with the words that say, our first duty is to our patients, their families, and society. And I think it summarizes, it leads to the bottom line. What we actually try to do is we strongly believe in making better drugs to help patients. If we do that right, and if we do it in the correct way, there will be a return on investment for our investors at the end, but it's not the other way around. And with that,
thank you.